How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. The candidate for this week's makeover is this little angel lamp that I found at Goodwill the other day. When I first saw it, my initial reaction was, oh, this thing is kind of disgusting. It's crusty and falling apart. But I thought about it and I realized with a little bit of tender love and care, I could really goth this thing up and it would fit in perfectly in my office and be just a beautiful piece to have. And so that's what I did. As you can see, I really need to do something about this wobbly ass light fixture, as well as this very musty lampshade. I do not know what that masking tape was doing, because it certainly was not helping anything. This lamp sat on the floor of my office for a couple of weeks before I can get to it, and so it felt so good to start finally disassembling everything and getting its makeover underway. As I've said before, this boy was crusty as hell, and I do not know what you do to a lamp to get it all gross and dirty, because it's truly just sitting there, but you know, these things happen, I guess. So before I could start doing anything with paint or anything else, I need to give it a really good scrub down. Because there are so many little grooves and nooks and crannies on this bad boy, I had to get in there with a toothbrush to get into all the little details, because I quickly realized that it was just tearing the paper towel apart. It wasn't going to do the job that I needed it to do. After I had scrubbed everything down, I used a paper towel to dab up all of the wet dirt that the toothbrush had loosened up. To get the grime off of the actual light fixture part itself, I'm using a cotton ball that I've soaked in 100% acetone. There's probably other things that you could use for this, but this is what I happen to have on hand because I use it all the time for my doll repaints. So you just use what you got. If you have something else, you could do that too. I decided not to remove the stickers despite the fact that they were stained, because I didn't want to lose the information about what wattage of light bulb to buy for this lamp. Next, I'm removing the foam piece that was glued along the bottom because it was also stained and damaged, and I didn't want to, have it get covered in paint in some places, so I figured I could just replace it after everything is done. I ended up putting on a mask partway through this process because a bunch of, I think, plaster dust was sort of coming out of the bottom, and I figured that would not be good for me to inhale. It was really difficult to get an angle on this because I had to hold the angel upside down between my legs to have access to the bottom of it, but I'm just using more acetone on a cotton ball in order to get off all of the excess adhesive that was left over by the foam bit on the bottom. It took a remarkable amount of scrubbing to get everything off, but in the end it was a pretty satisfying process to see all of the little gunk and goo getting eaten away. Next, I needed to address the loose, wobbly light fixture. So in order to fix this, I'm just shoving some air dry clay down along the hole that it comes out of, so there isn't so much excess space for it to move around in. I end up adding a little bit extra later, but I try to like mimic the texture that was already on the statue. That way it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. It was really difficult to get clay smushed down in that little nook between his head and the light fixture, so I just did my best. Using that same clay, I'm also adding horns to his forehead, which is a decision that I went back and forth on because I think it was already so beautiful as it was, and I think it really has a very like cemetery vibe that, you know, lends itself to being, you know, kind of goth and fitting into my office. But I just felt like the horns would make it a little bit more unique, and you know, it would have more of my personal touch added to it than if I had just, you know, painted it black and called it a day. So it was a little bit daunting and nerve-wracking to get these sculpted on there because, you know, I didn't want to, it's beautiful, I don't want to mess it up, but with a little bit of work, I ended up with something I was very happy with, and I think it just looks really cool, and they're kind of subtle, you know, so if you see it from a distance you don't even notice they're there, but you know, you get closer to it and you see these little horns, and it tells more of a story, I guess. I don't know, it's a lamp. I don't need to get that deep about it, but I'm just really happy with it. It was really difficult to sculpt around his hair. It was such a tight space to work in, so getting the backside of the horn sort of shaped out how I wanted was a little bit of a challenge. Once the horns were dry, I went in with a very thin strip of a nail file as well as like a very tightly rolled piece of sandpaper in order to just refine the shape of the horns and get a more, you know, defined point on them that I could not get with wet clay. Once I'm done sanding, I take a wet paper towel and wipe off any sort of excess clay as well as all of the dust that was kicked off by the sanding process. Now that all of the clay bits are dried and sanded, I can now mask off the light fixture so that I can get it ready for paint. I also used a paper towel and some painter's tape to mask off the cord as well. Once everything is masked off, it's now time for many layers of very watered down black acrylic paint. Now, there are probably other materials you could use for this process, but I don't have like spray paint or like an airbrush or things like that. So I just, you know me, I like to make do with the materials that I already have to avoid having to purchase a bunch of things. And so this worked just as well, and it was very fun, honestly, like watching this like black paint drip down this little angel figure. Like, I don't know, I saw it looked cool. Like, part of me almost wish that I could keep it this like kind of drippy effect, but that's just, not the look that I was going for. My husband was mildly shocked by how messy of a process that this is, but, if you care more about whatever surface you're working on, you could put paper down or whatever so you don't have paint dripping everywhere, but I honestly don't think it's that hard to just clean the paint off of this desk. Like, it's fine, it's a cheap desk, it's not going to hurt anything, so I just made a huge mess and, worried about it later. Once the first coat is fully dry, it's time for round 2. And the reason why I'm doing this in very watered down layers is because of how many nooks and crevices that the paint needs to flow into. So if you go in with really thick paint, it'll sort of fill in some of those little grooves and you'll lose some of the detail on, the sculpture. So, if you want to maintain as much detail as possible, you water down your paint a lot. Once the base coat is finished, I'm dry brushing the whole thing with metallic silver paint. This step also serves to help bring back some of the details that are lost when you paint something all one color. It picks up all of the raised edges and helps them stand out a little more. I also really like the effect that it gives because it really reminds me of the little pewter statues they used to give us when I was in Girl Scouts if you sold a certain amount of cookies. So it kind of takes me back to that, and I really like that look. I'm going to take this time while I'm finishing up the dry brushing to say, if you watched this far and you like this video, consider liking it. It really helps me out a lot. And if you want to see more videos from me, more makeovers, more art-related stuff, consider subscribing. I put out new videos fairly regularly, and I have lots of things in store for this new year that I'm very excited about. And so if you don't want to miss it, hit that little button. Also, please leave a comment, let me know what you think about this sort of video. I know it's a little bit different from what I usually do, but if you like stuff like this, I would love to do more of it because I really enjoyed this whole process. Once I'm done with all of the painting, I can finally remove all of the masking tape and see how good or bad of a job it did from protecting the light fixture. I really thought this process would be more satisfying than it actually was, but because I used so many little pieces of tape overlapped on each other, it was very difficult to get all of them off, but, it took a little bit of time and some elbow grease, but eventually we got there. I tried using some acetone on a Q-tip to remove some of the excess paint, but it actually ended up removing some of the like white glaze stuff on the light fixture, so I kind of backed off because I didn't want to, you know, cause more problems. The last thing I need to do to finish the lamp base is add a new piece of foam to the bottom. And luckily I already had this piece of black foam and the sheet was about the perfect size I needed to cut it out of. And so I just place the lamp on top and I'm just tracing around it with an X-Acto knife, being careful to not, chip any paint or anything like that as I'm going around. Looking back, it probably would have been smarter to trace around the lamp with a pencil first and then remove the lamp and cut it out separately without the lamp being on top, because then you wouldn't have to worry about chipping paint or cutting the cord or anything like that at all. But I didn't think about that until right now, so I guess I wanted to live dangerously the day I was doing this. Now I'm applying a generous coat of Mod Podge to the whole piece of foam in order to adhere it to the bottom of the lamp. The reason why I'm using Mod Podge for this is because it's sort of the only glue I have in the house that isn't hot glue, and I just felt like hot glue would be a really bad choice for this because it could melt the foam and sort of warp it and make it look kind of gross and lumpy on the bottom, and I want to keep it as smooth as possible. Now all I have to do is wait for that to dry, and while I'm doing that, I can start working on the lampshade. I was being kind of careful in how I was disassembling this at first, because I was really curious to see how this lampshade was even made, because I've never made one before, and so it was really interesting to see what the actual construction was. And it was also very interesting to see how much cleaner it was on the inner layers, and seeing that there was once a time when this lampshade was actually white and not this sort of like yellowy cream color. Once I freed the frame from this gross plasticky material that was covering it, I'm able to go in and add my own material to make a new lampshade. And the material that I'm using for this is called Creepy Cloth. That's the only thing I've ever seen it listed as. I don't know if there's like another more technical name for it, but it's usually available around Halloween time and you could sort of drape it over things and make them look spooky. And so I just put a piece of that over the top and cut a hole so that I could start sewing it around the top part of the frame. I was really afraid that it wouldn't actually stand up to being sewn, but it actually worked pretty well, and I just was very generous with the amount of stitching that I did on top to really make sure that everything was bound down tightly so that when I sewed the bottom it wouldn't come loose up top. Also, this is just a side complaint. This thread that I used to do this sucked so much ass, dude. It kept breaking on me, but at a certain point I was already dedicated to using this thread, so I just like sucked it up and toughed it out, but like it was really frustrating. And if you're also doing a project sort of like this, I'd recommend using thread that is the same color of whatever material that you're using, because obviously it'll blend in better and won't stand out. But for the purposes of this, I used a brighter thread so that you could see what I'm doing. Once everything is sewn up top, I'm just trimming the excess material around the bottom to get ready to sew along the bottom edge of the frame. And this is what it looked like after one layer of creepy cloth sewn around it. And at this point, I thought it still looked way too naked, so I went ahead and did 3 layers of creepy cloth sewn around the whole thing. Next, I'm adding a trim to cover up all of the sewn edges, that way it looks a little bit cleaner, and for that I'm using this lace ribbon that was white, but I painted it black so that it would fit in with everything else. And to attach this, I'm just using hot glue, and luckily the way this ribbon is, it has this very defined center line, so as long as that center line was glued down right where it needed to be, I could keep it even all the way around. And if you also ever have to hot glue lace onto something, be very careful because the glue can just squeeze up between all the little holes and get your little fingers and burn them, which happened to me a few times. And of course, I also had to add that trim to the top as well. I feel like it took absolutely forever to get the trim along the bottom edge, so adding the trim to the top was a very nice change of pace. It was just a lot more satisfying and easier to do. As I get close to finishing up this project, I have to say it was so fun to work on something that has a practical use within my home. Like, I kind of want to go out and get more lamps and just keep remaking lamps. It was so much fun, and I was so proud of myself by the end of it because I did something I had never done before, and I think, you know, this is a call for everyone to try new things every once in a while. You never know what you'll like. The last step to finish up this lampshade is to go back over the trim with more black paint. This served to both cover up the hot glue mess as well as darken it up just a bit so it blended in a little bit better with the creepy cloth material. And of course I had to repeat this step on the bottom trim as well. And with that, the lampshade is all finished, and so the last thing that I need to do is assemble everything and put in a fresh new light bulb. Here are the before and afters. I think I've said this a few times now, but I am absolutely obsessed with how this came out. It just makes me so happy to look across my office and see this little guy lighting up my shelf. This is really something I want to do more in the future, so you may be seeing some custom lamps coming to my shop at some point, because I cannot feasibly fit more lamps in my house. I already have enough. And if you have any ideas for things that I could lampify, that's stupid, let me know in the comments below. At this point, I wasn't quite out of the woods yet because there was still one last very important step that I needed to do, and that was making sure that this thing would even turn on. Okay, moment of truth. Thank God. This is not the right light bulb for this. Alright, that's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you all next time. Love you, bye!